Uh, Good morning to everyone who has joined us here at the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, short IDM, as well as to those who are joining us online. My name is Malvina Talik. I'm a research associate here at the IDM, and I will guide you through today's event. And our event is Democratic Belarus. Why is it crucial for a peaceful Europe? We are honored to organize this discussion together with two very distinguished cooperation partners, which are the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania, and actually the initiative for this event came from you, and which is the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. We also have two distinguished guests, two exceptional speakers with us. To my right is Denis Kuhinsky, diplomatic advisor to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Happy to have you here. And Vitas Yurkonis, Associate Professor at the Institute of International Relations and Political Science at Vilnius University. Happy to have you here. Thank you for coming to Vienna. Before we move into the discussion, let me pass the floor for introductory remarks to Egle Raczynskiene, Minister Plenipotentiary at the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania.
Thank you, Marina. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Embassy of Lithuania in Vienna, I would like to express our appreciation to our partners for organizing this event, the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe, and the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And my special thanks go to the speaker from Lithuania, Mr. Vitas Yurkonis. Belarus is our neighbor, and its fate is important for Lithuania and Europe. Unfortunately, in recent years, we have witnessed increasing persecution of opposing voices, a record high number of political prisoners, the use of the death penalty, the involvement in the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and the restriction of democracy and freedoms. We have great faith in the will and determination of the Belarusian people to change the situation. Let me welcome you all and invite you to actively participate in the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the welcome. And now let's dive into the discussion. So the 2020 presidential elections 5 years ago in Belarus were a turning point for the country. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, initially underestimated by the Lukashenko regime, emerged actually as a very serious contender and challenged the potential sixth term of Lukashenko. Officially, Lukashenko won the race, but there were numerous and credible indications of manipulation in the electoral process, which is why, among others, the EU did not recognize the result. What followed were unprecedented peaceful demonstrations by Belarusians, which met with equally unprecedented brutal repression from the regime. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya had to flee the country. She established her office in Lithuania, a country which is one of the staunchest supporters of Belarusian opposition. And now, 5 years on, what is the current situation in Lithuania? What is the situation of Belarusians in the country and outside of the country? How does the state of affairs in Belarus affect regional and European security? And what are the prospects for a democratic Belarus? And can Europe be truly peaceful without it? So these are some of the questions that we'll be discussing. And I'm turning to you, Denis. When Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was running in the presidential race, that brought a hope for many Belarusians for a democratic transition or entering the democratic path. We know that those hopes were smashed brutally. Belarus returned to democracy, but what happened in those last 5 years politically in Belarus? Where's Belarus now?
Thank you. Before I answer, big thanks for organizing this event. I think it's really important, especially for Australian audience, to talk about Belarus. Big thanks as well to to Egle and to Ambassador Limo as well for making that happen. And I think answering your question, let me just disagree first. I think hope never dies. It's something that is a too strong feeling. And we see within this 5 years, and I'll just make a very, very short throwback what happened after my boss, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, won election, became the president. She was forced to go into exile, and she got response by Lithuania to be this headquarters for her office. Meanwhile, people in Belarus for this 2020 they were continuing to protest peacefully, as you rightly said. There were massive manifestations that Belarus has never seen in the history. We never have had million of the people in the streets. We never had such a big uprising, as we said, for hope and for democracy. And at the same time, regime was slowly but surely, stopping people from uprising and putting them in prison one by one, one by one. At the same time, if we look into the last 5 years, I think there are important milestones. Just to repeat for the audience to remember that in 2021, Lukashenko has also hijacked a Ryan airplane. It was an act of international piracy. Why? Just in order to detain a Belarusian journalist, who was and one of the at that time opposition figures, just to detain this person. At the same time, the same month, he was ruining all the media and all the NGOs, out from the country. Then he started to orchestrate a so-called migration crisis, which is in reality an orchestrated attack on the neighbors, including Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia, by sending these migrants that were actually paying money to go to European Union, and they were flawed to the borders of the neighboring countries. And then, last but not least, very, very importantly, that in February 22, Lukashenko gave basically our country, our territory and land as a launching pad for the Russian attacks against Kiev, against Ukraine. So he gave the full, basically, as I said, territory and land to them, and became the accomplice to this war. And up until that time, since 2022, and up until now, till 2025, there was no day when the repressions were not stopping in Belarus. At the moment, we have 1,300 political prisoners. The real number is bigger. Every day we have up to 20 people being arrested and detained, absolutely for made up charges. For example, for I don't know, liking a post on Facebook or Instagram, or for wearing a white shirt and red tie, or for simply disagreeing with the regime or opposing the war. So that's what happened within this 5 years. So our country essentially became it got double, as we say, double crisis or double occupation, creeping occupation. On the one side, it is occupied by Lukashenko, who lost election and has no legitimacy, and at the same time, it is also a creeping occupation by Russia, who is economically, military, financially is using basically our territory and getting our sovereignty out, which Lukashenko is selling. So this is on the regime side. When it comes to the people, as we said, Madam President went to Vilnius into exile, and she created basically alternative institutions of power, government in exile, with her headquarters as the office of the president in Lithuania in Vilnius, United Transitional Cabinet as a government in exile that works on specific directions on transit, on culture, on social issues, on defense in Warsaw, and the Coordination Council, which serves as a potential candidate for being a proto-parliament, basically. So we created these institutions in order to have a real opposition and the real difference to Lukashenko's regime. And these institutions, they work outside of the country, but inside the country, we still have people and resilience. And as I said, hope doesn't die, because people, and I think we'll dive in more into the details on the moods, they didn't change their minds. They didn't turn the page as Lukashenko wanted to do. They didn't stop believing in democracy. They didn't stop. They didn't start liking Lukashenko again, or they didn't start feeling that okay, we need to be with Russia. So this is essentially the status quo we have now. So the country is seized. It is in some ways creepily occupied, but at the same time, the moods of the people and their mentality, the way of thinking didn't change. But at the same time, of course, it's a big frozen situation because people have a lot of fear, and we are now in this in some way safe mode. We don't want to risk people, but we are preparing, not wait, but preparing for the moment of opportunity, for the window of opportunity, when it opens, that we can act again. Because essentially this dictatorship, they seem so stable, they seem so powerful until they don't, until they just collapse, like we saw in Syria and other countries. And we need to be prepared as an alternative, as a people who can turn Belarus into democracy and into the safe country, which will be crucially important both for our neighbors, but also for the whole Europe.
There's a quick follow-up question, because you mentioned that even for posting something, people may face repression. This shows how much the regime is also controlling the information space and manipulates it. But what does it mean for us learning about the situation in Belarus? How much information do we actually get from Belarus? How much is being blocked? And what sources can we rely on when we want to know more about the situation there? Like, I think there's no contact to some of the political prisoners.
Well, I think to get the information about the situation inside the country, I mean, God bless internet. And God bless as well the connections we can still have with people. I just came in the morning from Albania, and when we were telling these stories to some of the people who lived through the Hoxha regime, they couldn't believe it. But if we compare these regimes in the 70s and 80s and 60s and earlier to the regimes now, there is a disadvantage, of course, that they cannot stop. This is an internet. So essentially, it's not blocked. So internet is possible, I mean, to use. YouTube is accessible. Of course, they try to block them, through the web pages, but it's accessible through VPNs. 70% of the population know how to use and navigate through the independent media, and they get information from what is going on in the world on the one hand, and we also get this information from them through the means of communications, also through traveling. I mean, people still are able to come, to Europe and share the information and say what's going on. Of course, when it comes to the political prisoners, yes, indeed, there are so-called incommunicado modes for some of the political prisoners. It's a form of torture, to be frank. For example, for the husband of my president, Slavin Tikhanovskaya, no information from him for more than 2 years. We don't know if he's alive, to be frank. The lawyers are not allowed. So from the prison, yes, of course, it's for some of the political prisoners, it's more difficult to get the information. But at the same time, people, even inside the Lukashenko regime, even inside all the ministries, they're leaking information. They are providing us with the insights. They are most of them, they are technocrats. They don't want to serve this regime. They want to, turn country as well to democracy. So there is no this informational blockage. At the same time, of course, the propaganda. This is a huge threat, and it's not just Lukashenko's and Belarusian regime propaganda. Unfortunately, we have a huge investment of Putin into his propaganda into Belarus. Just last year, they spent $500 million just on his propaganda, on Putin's propaganda in Belarus, saying about about the war, about bad Ukrainians, anti-Western narratives. So of course they're using it, and we need to combat it. And here, very important point. Of course, everyone understands, I think, and knows about the war in Ukraine, full-scale war with missiles and tanks. But at the same time, we have an informational and quiet war inside Belarus as well, with two narratives actually competing now. One is Lukashenko-Putin narrative, and then the pro-European, pro-democracy narratives. So of course, there is this informational war, and here it's very important, to support this, media institutions, civil society organizations, by countries like Lithuania and Poland, who are hosting the media outlets that are working in. The leadership is working in exile, but the journalists and people, informants, they're staying inside the country. So of course, it's a big task and it's difficult, but we try not to lose this connection between exile and people inside the country. Yes, it is difficult, but somehow we still manage. And my president is having every week, she has so-called office hours, Zoom calls. Anyone from Belarus can call her and talk to her for 10, 15 minutes. So we try to foster and keep this connection with people inside the country.
Thank you. As you can see on this map behind Vitis and Denis, Lithuania is quite far from Austria, which makes our perspective here very different from yours. And sometimes we don't understand what it might be to have Belarus as a neighbor. Vitis, could you tell us more about it? What implications have to Lithuania to be neighboring Belarus, and how has this neighborhood evolved in the past 5 years?
Thank you for having me here. Really pleasure to be here. And let me start with using my own like example. I started like working on Belarus related issues in 2004, like when Lithuania became a place for relocating European Humanities University. That's a Belarusian university, like which was forced to basically relocate and operate in exile. So that was my first assignment, working at the institute as the project assistant. And gradually, I started to have like more and more friends from Belarus, and realize how lucky I am to live 30 kilometers on this side of the border, not that side of the border. Like, I think that many of us like take democracy and fundamental freedoms for granted, as if that's something which is like must be. And when you have a neighbor like Belarus, then you understand that it's not necessarily the case. I think now we are, of course, experiencing the turbulent times, and in certain European countries, there are also all sorts of like concerning trends. But for me, for like throughout the decades, it became more and more obvious that that you need to fight for freedom. Belarusians, despite the very like severe conditions, were fighting and continue to fight for freedom. And I think it's much more easy to like work in the democratic society and protect the fundamental freedoms. So that's one like my personal like example. I'm speaking about that to my students, to Lithuanian media, to civil society, to the general public. And I think that that's not only a moral like obligation of some sort, but there's of course geographical proximity is there. We have a common history of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where like Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, like once like were like this state in the same area, like fighting the aggressor, usually Moscow. I mean, and the current like situation somewhat like reminds us of all of that when we had a like external threat. At the same time, I think that that's I can call it if we talk about Lithuanian foreign affairs, it's a two-eye principle, one which is an inspiration and the other is an interest. Like we are interested to have a democratic, transparent, like neighbor, like and an inspiration, because like there were many people like who spoke that well, there's no demand for democracy anymore. I mean, in Brussels, that was like, well, with this big bang in 2004, like the expansion like of the EU, as it ended. There's no willingness, like and Belarusians were kind of kicking, showing no, 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 like we want Europe, we want to be in the like maybe that was not a like clear demand for like entering the EU, but that was a clear call for European values, like right to choose, like right for free and fair elections. That was what happened in 2020. And then another like kind of example of the inspiration were like many. I remember I had conversations with the various foundations in May 2020. Very few were optimistic about the upcoming like elections in Belarus, and I was one of the few saying like something big is going to happen. And so yeah, because you are too much inside the box, like you are like too biased. And then when it happened, and I was also speaking to Lithuanian foreign like policymakers, saying, we need to get ready. Back then we were like at the like big COVID restrictions times. I said, what if we have many wounded people like who would not have visas and stuff, and they would be coming to our border? We need some sort of a humanitarian corridor, and that's like that's actually like Lithuania was at the front line, the first like line responder. That's why Svetlana Tikhanovskaya like is in Vilnius, I believe. That's like together with the human rights defenders, independent media. We are talking about thousands of people, but at the same time, I don't know how many of you know the Baltic Way, like which happened like before the Soviet Union like collapsed. I think that the biggest non-violent resistance like example worldwide, like 2 million people holding hands from Vilnius to Tallinn. And I had my fellow academics saying, well, you know, civil society is weak, is not interested. They would never we would never ever be at the times repeating the similar exercise again. And guess what? In 2020, we came up with a few like civil society representatives saying, what if we prolong this Baltic way to another B, Belarus, connecting Vilnius to Belarus? And we had a live chain of people from Vilnius to Medininkai at the border with, which was like 50,000 people altogether. So in a way, that was not only that we were watching and observing, and expressing solidarity with Belarusians, but it was also kind of a call for us to unite and to show that solidarity and to act ourselves, showing that in fact we do have a civil society. In fact, we do have people who genuinely care for democracy and human rights, and that was repeated later on with the solidarity actions with Ukraine. So I think it's both an inspiration and a very pragmatical interest, because a democratic and independent Belarus is obviously a national interest of Lithuania.
Very often we think that our societies or civil societies have become dominant until there is a challenge, and then we realize that actually there is much more strength and power in there than we would think. But let me just ask you a follow-up about security, because for a long time Lukashenko was emphasizing that he was the guarantor of security in the region. It seems quite the opposite at the moment, but what does it mean to Lithuania? Like, what are the security challenges coming from Belarus to Lithuania?
Multiple, and I think that has been a case. The last time Lithuania was kind of daydreaming about Belarusian regime actually opting for some European path was in 2009, 2010, where Lithuania was proactively saying let's give a chance, and I think that some of you might remember what happened in 2010, back then also the presidential elections. Back then, the biggest repressions as a follow-up, and that was a slap to President Grybauskaitė and the Lithuanian foreign policy makers, and also a signal: don't trust Lukashenko. So we've learned that lesson before. And then Lithuania, for many years, had the biggest bilateral issue with official Minsk, which was the nuclear power plant in Astravets, where Lithuania was saying, hey, that's 50 kilometers from Lithuania. There was no agreement with the neighbor, coordinating this. We were saying that's a Russian Kremlin's project. That's not independence. That's not sovereign energy independence. Quite the contrary. You know that Lithuania is now basically disconnecting from REL, the energy circle of Russia, which came at the cost. But that cost, but the benefit of that is full independence from Russia. And back then I was fighting with some of the Belarusian Democrats and independent experts saying, guys, what are you doing? So this, and of course we had military exercise, Zapad, obviously we were seeing the collaboration between the security services of Belarus and Russia. I mean, there were a lot of indicators that, well, don't trust Lukashenko. Back then, McKay, who were imitating the balancing policy, and they want to get back on track again, saying that, if you are not lifting the sanctions, Russia is going to eat us up. But it's not the fault of Europe. It's a fault of Lukashenko's regime. And I know that in 2020, inside the system, there were some Belarusian officials who didn't choose the side of the Belarusian people, arguing that we are not traitors like Latushka, who betrayed, and we are going to protect Belarus because these inexperienced democratic forces are incapable of that. Now, since the full-scale invasion, I think even they realize that, in fact, they are the traitors. In fact, they are selling out piece by piece the Belarusian independent sovereignty. And the biggest fundamental issue is that no man, one man, no president can be a guarantor of independence and sovereignty. I mean, whoever who's coming from democratic countries understand that the people are the sovereign, the foundation of sovereignty. And with that, you know, when in 2021, Denise mentioned the Belarusian regime wiped out the independent media, they suddenly realized that they are the front of the information like war, like fighting the Kremlin narratives and all of that. So this realization is even there in the system, and we can go on, like talking about the nuclear like weapon, about the like deployment of the like Russian army, about the like using Belarusian like so. Well, I'll give you one example of everyone knows the general like Ben Hodges, who's now at SIPA, but he was like in charge of the like NATO like troops in Europe. We had this discussion in 2019 with him. He kind of thought that it's better to like work with Belarusian regime and help them distance themselves from Kremlin. And his argument was like, Vitus, would you like to have Belarusian or Russian border instead? You know, I said like, well, there's not much of a difference, in fact. And when 2021 instrumentalized migration happened, I texted him, so general, what do you think? You know, is it the Belarusian or Russian border? And when the full-scale invasion started, I kind of shied away of texting him saying, do you want to tell that to Ukrainians? Is there a difference? Bucha and Hostomel direction happened from the Belarus side. So in fact, we need to be very, very realistic of what Lukashenko and his associates are.
Thank you. Let's shift our experience to the Belarusian society and Belarusian diaspora. Dennis, what did those last 5 years mean for you and for other Belarusians who live in exile? And you mentioned before that you don't think that those who stay actually accept the regime. Probably they don't have much choice. But what did the life become to them the last 5 years?
For many of them, especially of those who are inside the country, I mean, in some ways, it's an operation of survival as well, because you don't know what's going to happen. You know, it's like a gamble. You can go on the streets, someone will just stop you and check your phone, and we'll see that you are, let's say, subscribed for one of the independent channels, and this is already, you know, 5-6 years in prison. That's why, by the way, people have 2 phones in Belarus. One they have at home, the second they go on the street. So in case they're stopped, they can check that there is nothing there. And at the same time, they also understand, as Vitas mentioned, especially after 2022, even those who were considering, oh, well, is Lukashenko guarantor or not, or at least we're not there, they saw like what happens and how Lukashenko supported this war. And that actually the plan of Putin as well is to have this amazing, actually, I don't agree when people say Belarus is small. Belarus is a big country. To make it this one, second Kaliningrad Oblast, basically. So this is the plan of Putin. This is the way he perceives our territory, and this is the way you know that he wants as well people to believe in it. But what's interesting, the people in Belarus, they don't accept it. Only 4% of the population of Belarus want to have reunification with Russia. That's insignificant. Even more interesting enough, you know, in Belarus, it's not often said, but in Belarus we have almost 1 million Russians, to be precise, 750,000. And these Russians, they don't want to live in Russia. You know, they like Belarus, you know, because they understand that it's, you know, the attitudes towards work, attitude to people, kindness, it's you know, national identity of Belarusians is better than in Russia. And you know, at the same time, you know, stepping back to what you asked, people, of course, they didn't accept this regime. We see, I mean, according, of course, it's difficult to have any polls, but we see on the number of indicators that they didn't turn the page. They didn't start to like Lukashenko more, but they are in this, as I said, in this safe mode, basically. And people in exile, or as some people, they don't want to call themselves immigrant, they call themselves relicants, because most of them, they want to come back to Belarus eventually. sooner or later. And for them, it's also tough because there is a term that we're using now called transnational repressions. So basically, and this is something, again, something new. We were just yesterday in Albania, and we were discussing that these tools, for example, Hodja and others, they were not using. They were not persecuting that much, the diaspora or exile people. Meanwhile, Lukashenko does that. So he persecutes people abroad as well. They do these courts in absentia. For example, I myself, I'm sentenced to 11 years in prison, recognized as extremist and also as terrorist. So congratulations, we had a very good day with the terrorists today. And I mean,
According to
Belarusian standards, yes. Well, but at the same time, well, we can joke about it, but in the reality, it means it means difficulties. It means difficulties as well, for the families, also for as well this so-called law that Lukashenko passed in 2023, not allowing people to renew their passports and documents at the embassies and consulates. This is actually one of the very few examples in the history when things like that happen. The only one I can imagine is the one during the Nazi regimes, when they were depriving people of citizenship. And essentially, it's just because we have countries like Lithuania or Poland who are helping people with, actually in Austria too, finally, we also found a solution for having this foreigner passport, so people can have a legal document to travel and to be legal. We have this opportunity for people not to be abandoned because the state abandoned them. And people come to us, to our office of Stanskanoska. We talk to the governments as well, trying to look long-term and short-term solution. And we're not talking about, I don't know, 100 people. We're talking about 500,000 of Belarusians that left after 2020. And 1.5 million already were living, abroad. So we have all in all about, 2 million Belarusians all over the world, which is around 20% of the population.
So what are you saying? I mean, like what he has drawn regarding results, 87%. Not real, right? It's like so many live abroad and they are deprived of actually, that's the right to vote. That's kind of a clear evidence. The guy is lying if anyone have any doubts, but it's just that kind of like absurdity. And that's also such a huge, basically Lukashenko pretends, and he organizes like unity gatherings, all of that.
Right, yeah.
But in fact, what he is doing is he's splitting the society. They're like, he is intentionally like putting that you are deprived. It's not only about the passport. I mean, if Denis, for instance, wants to like get married, he needs to have like proof that he's not married in Belarus. He cannot get that document, and he's deprived of creating a family. If he had rented apartment, if he had a loan in Belarus, his loan is going, but he cannot sell the apartment. So there are lots of practicalities, not only for those who are like labeled as extremist terrorists, but even the ordinary people who have nothing to do with the protests or with the democratic forces. So I mean, it's a huge issue. I want to also dive a little bit to the first question that you had regarding this inspiration and this hope. I think that there are a few aspects well, we see the released political prisoners, not because of the goodwill of Lukashenko, but simply their term ended. And when I see their determination to continue, saying that we need sanctions, we need to help the others. I see that this fight is continuing. Media, the largest independent media, Tudbai, managed, after completely being wiped out, managed to restore their audience in Belarus, which was the biggest independent media in Belarus. This is huge. I mean, despite the repressions, despite all the restrictions, we had also the marathon for the political prisoners by some human rights defenders, and they managed to crowdfund 500,000 euros, including funds from Belarus, which is also indicating that there are people who are continuing donating, who understand the course. So again, an indicator Belarus contingent in Ukraine, like fighting for Ukraine, is perhaps the biggest among the foreigners, and there are already almost 70 people who like perished in this fight. Again, showing huge solidarity and like showing the determination to fight. So it's incredible resilience. We have also cyber partisans who managed to leak the databases of the like Belarusian Ministry of Interior and all of that. So now, like all the international institutions, European countries potentially might have access which they didn't have before. We can name them name by name, like show their assets, show their real estate, show their family members, show their cars, show their like travel, like into Europe and all of that, which like we didn't have that transparency before. And Belarusian regime was rather creative, like with their kleptocratic ties, not that much as Russians, and yet. So in a way, and the identity issue is also there. If previously, like there were people, even books about the like, we don't know what kind of this Belarusian identity is, some sort of post-Soviet, now it's pretty obvious. It's Pahonia, it's white, red, white, it's the European vector, very clear European vector. So, even like if Kremlin wanted to kind of spread this Ruski Mir, the Democrats are indicating that no, we are part of Europe. And I think that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's office, again, meeting at the highest level, despite what happened like in Afghanistan, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Ukraine for that matter, Belarus is still high on the agenda. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is participating in Davos, like in Munich Security Conference, meeting with presidents, prime ministers. Again, that's what Lukashenko didn't have even before 2020, and so Belarusian democratic society is kicking above its like weight for sure.
Thank you. That is actually being abroad and not in the country. That puts you to a certain disadvantage. But do you think it also opens you some avenues, opportunities, which the office wouldn't have otherwise? How can you support Belarusian society, Belarusian cause when being in Lithuania?
I think both, because of course, when you're not inside the country, it's it's a challenge. Because and you see like in other movements as well, when they stay inside the country, it's it gives the advantages, to be with people, etc. But in our case, this is obvious. It's basically two options. It's either in exile or you're in prison. It's impossible to be an opposition leader or any figure now in Belarus. And Vitas just mentioned, just for information, he mentioned 87%. There was an event that took place a few weeks ago that's called Special Electoral Operation. Something that Lukashenko wants to call election, but it wasn't obviously, and he put himself 87%. And this was the first so-called election in our history when there were absolutely no opposition candidates. So there was basically Lukashenko, shadow advisor of Lukashenko, shadow supporter of Lukashenko, and just people around him. And they are trying to pretend that there are some spoilers, there are some candidates. In reality, no, it's impossible. They just if you're really an opposition figure, they put you in prison. So there is the choice: exile or prison. So of course, when you're not inside the country, some disadvantage, but at the same time, this is one of the goals of the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, which is difficult, we admit, but we try to keep the contact with people inside the country. Vitas already mentioned some of these initiatives, like cyber partisans, media, which is important the way they work. Yes, they shut it down in 2022, Zerkalo, Nashniva, and others, and the management moved to Lithuania and Poland. But journalists, people, informants, intelligence, intels, they're staying inside the country. This is the way, because we receive it through different channels and telegrams, safe ways. People are given the information of what's going on. So it's not, it's not fully, divided or blocked as exactly as Lukashenko wants it. He wants to divide. He calls, people in exile, he calls them refugees. He calls it like, you just run away. You are not Belarusians, and I even deprive you of this right to vote or right to have documents. Yes, they're trying to create this one, but we at the same time we're trying to connect it through some of the initiatives and cultural and identity ones that people can still get consumed from inside the country and through media, of course, through YouTube channels, through all the different, programs and activities. And of course, when we are in, in Lithuania or in Poland, of course, it gives the opportunity to continue the work, build structures, and get ready for the moment to come. So we can back, and we're not just sitting and waiting. We're preparing as well the, legislative initiatives like laws for the future. The plan how the country could look like. We're trying to get the support from different countries, organizations. It's not only, of course, conference is important, keep Belarus on the agenda, but what we're also working on with the governments is institutionalization of relations. We want strategic dialogue with US, with European Union, Council of Europe as well, with European Parliament. We signed a letter of cooperation. For the first time in the history, European Commission did an unprecedented thing. They did a 3 billion euro of support for future Belarus. Usually, European Commission makes such kind of promises or such kind of plans when the transit or democratization has already started. In our case, it's in advance, the commitment basically for the future. And this is exactly what we're trying to work, because one of the goals, the general goal, of course, of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is to hold free and fair election. That hasn't changed in 2020. It was her promise to the people to hold free and fair election. That's the goal. And of course, stopping repression and releasing of political prisoners. But in order, for that to happen, of course, we need to get ready to this, and that's why we're trying to work on this different layers. So I think in our case, again, we have some people who were trying to come back. Lukashenko is trying to say, like, come back, I will pardon you, you will have life, and you will not go to prison. And we see these people, sometimes they're buying it and they go and they appear in prison. Exactly like what Vitis said. We should not get fooled by Lukashenko again. He is not an independent player. He is not going to turn himself, the back on Putin. You mentioned Ben Hodge, but what's interesting as well, I think, especially now, is everyone is talking about US and elections and new administration after election. There was a moment when, to 2019, there was a visit of Secretary of State Pompeo.
2020, I think.
2019.
Oh, but
Well, no,
before
19, and then there was also the visit of the National Security Advisor. So there were like high-level visits, and
by the first Trump administration.
First Trump administration, they were coming, and Lukashenko was saying at that time, like, well, I may be, leaning towards West, towards US. Let's see about the petrol and other production and coming to Belarus. Maybe I can balance. And interesting enough, just go and read the book that Pompeo wrote after this. He said, I spent 4 hours there in this room, Lukashenko, and then from the very beginning, I understood that there is no serious talk here. He was just playing. So he was just like, acting. So he was never really intending to change it. And it is interesting because look at that time, prior to 2020. During the winter times, when it's cold, and you're closer to Putin. During summertime, you can play with trying to play with West. But again, this is something we should not buy.
And to add on that, Pompeo's deputy Steve Biegun came to Lithuania to meet with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in August 2020 already. So kind of that's also the indicator. I hope that the second administration of Donald Trump remembers that, like that slap in the face, and that they are not going to be turning the page, understanding that in a way, Belarus regime in this triangle of the authoritarian countries like Beijing, Moscow, Minsk is a low-hanging fruit, a weak spot, where China is pretending that they are not like selling any arms, like any drones directly. They are not doing that with Russia, but they are doing that via like Belarus. Belarus, in a way, is a very convenient transit option for them, a disguise of some sort. And that's where I perhaps would argue a little bit with Denise by saying this like second Kaliningrad, because the way I see it, it's in the Russian, like Kremlin's interest to keep Belarus with Lukashenko the way it is, because it's such a disguise, you know. They are voting at the UN, they are voting at the OSCE. They are the only ally, the only friend in a way of like Russia. That's one, you know. Remember this Minsk dialogue platforms, all of that. Where did they just leave that? They pretended it to be a neutral territory of some sort. It was never neutral, you know. And Putin knew very well what was happening in all other rooms. The function of this transit point, sanction circumvention, Belarus was always fulfilling the role, and that's why Lithuania is like super active on actually saying that we need to synchronize the sanctions, making sure there are no loopholes. So I would argue here slightly, you know, that I don't think that they wanna like de jure occupy like Belarus as such.
De facto, yeah, de facto Kaliningrad always de jure, exactly, I fully agree on this, because this is convenient. And it's convenient as well to show to other countries in a way, like, well, it's an independent kind, an independent
Plus,
state.
it would be such an overstretch for like Moscow, given that they are not doing very well like in Ukraine in this regard. So, you know, having yet another like military kind of occupation of some sort, that would be an overstretch given this like circumstance.
But at the same, all the troops that are there in Belarus, the Russian troops, they're illegal. That's what we say. They should be withdrawn. When we talk about Ukraine as well, they shouldn't be there. I mean, it's
Obviously.
absolutely against. We mentioned as well the
Constitution.
Constitution. We mentioned also nukes. 64% of the population of Belarus, according to polls, is against, you know, the having the nukes, because there are three words Belarusians like hate and don't like. It's Lukashenko, it's war, because we lost like a lot of people during the Second World War, First World War, and all the wars, Napoleon War, all of it. It was all happening through this territory. So it was always passing. So people like on the very DNA level, they cannot stand with war. That's why 87% of the population is against the participation of the Belarusian troops in the war in Ukraine on the Russian side. And the last one, the third part is Chernobyl. This is why for people like Austrians or like having already the nukes, why do we need them? We don't want to, you know, fight against Ukrainian. We don't want to fight against Russians. We don't want to fight against Lithuanians and Poles. So this is something absolutely.
Just a quick comment on Chernobyl. What we forget very often in other parts of Europe is that Belarus was one of those countries that was most affected by the explosion in Chernobyl, as the toxic went actually to the north. But the Russian war in Ukraine has been already mentioned many times during our discussion. We say that Belarus plays this gray zone game actually, so it's a tacit ally of Russia, not really directly involved in the war, but at the same time using its territory for Russian army, nuclear tactic weapons to station there. Lukashenko also recently said he has no regrets about this kind of involvement. What does it mean for Europe's security with Belarus playing this game? What does it mean for NATO's eastern flank as well?
I think, you know, like this is very interesting, like the way what Lukashenko says, you know, in the media and in the things he does. So the way he's trying to sell to Belarusian people through his propaganda that, oh yeah, well, we kind of joined this war because we need to, because we're together with Russia and we need to do this. I mean, obviously he does that because he knows that there is absolutely no support for this war within the society, but not just the society himself, but also within the army. So this is, I want to make it very clear. The reason why Belarusian army did not join this war, it's not because of Lukashenko. It's because of people, because they don't want this. Even the army doesn't want that. And I'm actually not sure if Putin wants that. Because again, as Vita said, it's very convenient to have this kind of a state that through which you can circumvent sanctions, through which you can, you know, have these loopholes and continue your military operation. What's also not known vis-a-vis the Belarusian regime in Ukraine, that there are at least 140 enterprises in Belarus that have been militarized. They are working on the production of optics, chips, you know, the parts of the, you know, planes, tanks, etc. So essentially, Belarus and our country, unfortunately, has become this assembly shop. By the way, not only for Russia.
Say military garage. I like this.
Military garage, yeah. For North Korea as well, for Iran. So when people are talking, using the Reagan terms of this axis of evil, they say North Korea. Okay, they say Iran, they say, Russia. But Belarusian regime and Lukashenko, he's somewhere, in the shadow of Putin. So that's why he needs to be, in this list. And what you mentioned about, so also now coming back to US, Cuba as well. There is not such a stronger communist regime than Lukashenko has in Belarus, and the whole support he gives as well to Cuba. All of this again happens against the will of Belarusian people. He lost this election. Everything he does is absolutely illegal. So Belarusians are not bearing that responsibility for what he has done. And that's why for the security architecture, one message that we're trying to say to Europeans and also to upcoming US administration, the peace in Ukraine will not last without democratic and free Belarus. Look at the map. We have 1,000-kilometer border with Ukraine. We have 750 miles border with NATO countries, and also Slovakia, which is like 35 miles or so. This is one of the keys to the security architecture in Europe lies through Belarus. And we don't need to explain, like, let's say, to Lithuania or to Poland, because not just because they understand it in terms of the border, but because they know what Russia is, what Putin is. And sometimes what we lack in Europe is, well, people say Lithuania is a small country. Lithuania is a small country, but it has big heart and big teeth. And sometimes you need to show teeth, because this is the way Putin acts as well. Only if you show him strength, only if you show him teeth, like Lithuania or Poland does, you may, win this, because he's trying to see every weakness in every European country, in every part of the world, to use it. So my plea here is, like, without having democratic and free Belarus, we cannot have a secure and free Europe, and not secure and free Ukraine as well. Because again, the threat, this balcony, as they say, there will be always, you see how Kiev is close to the border, and somewhere here, this is more to Russia. So this is absolutely, crucially important.
So Lithuania is a country that has been showing teeth actually quite often also to other non-democratic countries. Lithuania has 2.8, 2.9 million inhabitants, if I'm not mistaken, correct me please. But it also showed resistance to China, for example, to Russia, to Belarusian regime. So we see that size doesn't matter, but it's much more what you said, big heart
and teeth.
Political will. And as I understand right, there's also a support from the society for such actions.
Well, I think that first and foremost, we were supporting and expressing solidarity with the Belarusian people, with the Democrats in the region, and in a way with Taiwan and their aspirations. And back then, we have seen the retaliation by the authoritarian countries. I think that Lithuania, as a small country, understands that if we want to be safe and secure, we need to have a functional international system where international norms are respected. That's the main motivation. That's in a way our national security interest. Also, there's kind of this conversation about this new and old Europe. I think that, as I've said from the very beginning, there are certain countries which think that democracy and fundamental freedoms are for granted, that, well, the international system is as it is. It became more a process of some sort, and Lithuania understands that we need to defend it. It trusts that it's not only a luxury, but that's a necessity to have. And Belarus example, if anyone would say, these are only the daydreamers, it's some sort of an idealistic, romantic approach. I mean, we can say that to the French, we can say that to everyone else, who were concerned about what is happening in Africa. Wagner troops were traveling via Belarus to other continents as well. Now, to add on a little bit on what Denis said, can you imagine the Belarusian military officer who is kind of imposed that now the Wagner troops, some criminals, are going to train you? I mean, what does it say for a trained military officer? That's an insult. So, you know, like we talk a lot about the democratic society, we talk a lot about the opposition, but we can talk about the dire situation that Belarusian regime has. On the surface, like they are trying to say that we are good economically, that we have a cash flow, because this military garage, like in the Russian market, like now is available and is empty because there are less of the European goods. So technically, yes, but like it's not sustainable. And whoever who's smart, they understand that if Russia is going down, Belarus is going down like big time. And we know that like the regime is struggling and companies there are struggling with the human resources. People are leaving. The like most value added companies, EPAM, wargaming, all this IT sector left already. So, you know, like it's a dire situation for them. And, you know, like Lukashenko was himself suggesting, let's turn the page. But he's not turning the page himself. He knows that in 2020, he lost the majority. He doesn't, I mean, he can paint 87, 86, whatever, but he knows like that he cannot even pronounce Svetlana Tikhanovska's surname in this like he's depriving his people of the vote because he knows they are not going to vote. So, and in a way, we have confidence and trust that there is a demand for democracy and freedom. We see Belarusians, we see the Democrats, we see Taiwan, and I think we need to encourage them because, you know, I understand the skepticism, but somehow we are so, the skepticism about that freedom fight is not there like anymore. But when we see the peaceful protests happening in Sakartvelo, when we see the peaceful protests happening in Serbia, that's a call like for the like fight for freedom. And somehow we are always paralyzed by the threats and the intimidation from the authoritarian countries. I think we need to get back to the fundamentals. Europe is about freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And that's what Lithuania is kind of trying to be vocal about.
Thank you very much. I will now open the floor also to questions to you, but also online. So if you have them, please post them in the chat and Camila will pass them to me. I already see many hands up. Okay, let me maybe start in the room first. Mr. Kaufman.
Okay, thank you very much. Without the mic, it's
Without.
not necessary. Okay, perfect. Precisely about the independence of Belarus as Lukashenko is sort of selling out, as we know, and there seem to be ever more and more experts being channeled into ministries, police units, etc., pro-Russian. There is still a substantial difference if once Belarus was sort of forced more or less to become part of Russia again, then you would have your young people, soldiers, as Russian soldiers, as it happened in Donbass area. They are all now in the Russian army. So that could also happen to Belarusian young people, losing totally the independence, also in the military side. And it would change, of course, the geography because then Russia would be direct neighbor even more to a number of countries, and it would be very hard for Ukraine. Another question, very shortly. It seems that there is a development also in reacting on any on any demonstrations. When we look back to Maidan, there were shooting. Shooting was the wrong thing to do because then even more people poured to Maidan. Of course, Maidan is a place, it can be defended better than in Minsk, the huge streets you have. That's a different situation. But looking now at Georgia, demonstrations there, they have ever more riot people who just beat the people. And this seems to be maybe it's also orchestrated from Russia experts who show the countries how to handle such situations. So the one would be the question on the independence and the army, and the other on the riot police.
let's maybe collect, at least in the room, Mr. Fellinger, yeah.
My name is Günther Fellinger-Jan. I'm activist against Lukashenko since 98, actually. I was the first time in Minsk there in the parliament protesting against him, and he's still around, so
Thank you for doing that.
not very effective, unfortunately. Yeah. Nevertheless, I want to distance myself from the Austrian government's very close business relation with Belarus. Maybe you can comment yourself a bit on the links between the Austrian business sector and also Belarus, and also the visits which Mr. Lukashenko has made to Austria, being received by the president, I think it was 2018, and all these things. That would be very interesting. Also about the role of the exile government of Belarus. Is it officially recognized by the European Union? And do you have something like an observer status in the Council of Europe? Do you think this is a good idea? Should you have that? Did you apply already? This is important. The fertilizer question, I think I'm campaigning as well for the complete ban of all imports from Belarus towards the European Union. Now, finally, the fertilizer is on the agenda, as far as I understand, and should be these days. I don't know the exact status, but what's your opinion? Do you support this? And do you want that? And my last point is the EU directive for refugees, which we put in place for the Ukrainians. Yeah? Why don't we put that in place as well for the Belarusians, give the Belarusians in the EU a better status, and also sap a little bit the resources, human resources from Belarus into the EU? Is Lithuania supporting this? And how are the Lithuanians actually treating the Belarusians? Is there openness? And all these questions, please.
Those were actually 6 questions and helpful.
Yeah.
Who would like to start?
I can start with let me start with the last one, and then we'll come back as well. On the Austria, we see that some of the businesses are leaving. We saw, I mean, for example, that Raiffeisen and this daughter organization Perbank has sold it. And in general, our policy, as we say, when we talk about the sanctions, we indeed ask for stopping this business with the regime and make the sanction on goods, but not on the people. So that's what we say when we talk to European Union. So this should have a real economic hit, that it should be it should be done in full. And we see how like Lithuania and other countries are descending this and continue to lobby for this. But again, in the EU we have Hungary, we have some of these regions. It's not always that easy. But when we talk about the economic pressure and when we talk about EU, one of the most difficult actually things is the implementation of sanctions, because this is a bit different from the US. In the US, you have OFAC, you have Treasury, you have secondary sanctions, and this is overseen. And essentially, as we discussed previously, Belarus is being used as a loophole, because most of the sanctions, let's say, on Russia, they are imposed on importing things and Belarus on export, and then they use them basically each other to circumvent. So we need to have a better harmonization of them. So at the moment, I think it's around 60-65% is harmonized. It's still not yet enough. Of course, it makes the hit, but as soon as we don't have this enforcement, it doesn't be completely and in full. And indeed, yes, Austria was in the top 2, top 3 in terms of the trade with Belarus. But I think that now the tendency is, again, we continue to say that it's important to minimize that. There are no more visits or talks. I remember we had a meeting with President von der Leyen, and he was telling this about these visits and the way Lukashenko was behaving. But at the same time, we see that it's gone. This time, when Lukashenko can come to Vienna or somewhere else, it's done. He can forget about it. In terms of the recognition, we have, answering your question, the cabinet of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in her office, they have a de facto recognition. She is received by almost all the heads of state and heads of government and Minister of Foreign Affairs, etc. in all the countries. In terms of the de jure, there was a convention at this city in 1961, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which makes some of the decisions more complicated when we come to the de jure recognition. But at the same time, in Lithuania, for example, when she came, this is the parliament. Lithuania, Seimas has recognized her as a leader of Belarus. So what we see here, we have a de facto recognition. When it comes to the de jure, it's a little bit more complicated because in Belarus there are still some embassies, they're still issuing for example, visas or have some of the diplomatic relations. So this is we have the government in exile which has a de facto recognition. But what we work on, and actually a very good question about the Council of Europe, we try to work with this recognition and institutionalization. So with the Council of Europe, we are not a member, haven't been a member of the Council of Europe officially because of the death penalty and of course a lack of rule of law and democracy. But when we came in 2022 to the Council of Europe and met with at that time Secretary General Buric, we said like why we should like we can prepare already our path to the Council of Europe and essentially afterwards to European Union already now. And that at that time there was an unprecedented decision, the first ever has made to formalize relations between democratic forces of Belarus and the Council of Europe. And there was a contact group that has been established. And this contact group, it has passed through the Ministerial Council and also on the heads of states, heads of government on the Reykjavik summit last May. So it's a resolution of all members of the Council of Europe to have this contact group. And the way it works, there are 10 representatives from Belarusian democratic forces that are working on and civil society, so general Belarusian delegation that works on these three main paths that Council of Europe is based on, and 10 representatives from the Council of Europe. And after we've done it, I remember we were talking to the lawyers. We said, hey, it's impossible. No, you're not gonna make it. There's a Vienna Convention again, and this and that. This is not gonna work. This is not our stuff. And then it seems impossible until it's done. So now it's a formal group, and we did strategic dialogue with US. US has, oh, maybe you correct me, but I think 80 or 90 strategic dialogue with different countries. And the first ever strategic dialogue was the movement, Democratic Forces, was launched with us already, 2023. So this is where step by step we're doing the same with European Union. We have a consultative group. So we're trying to find the formats on which we can already work now and not to wait, for the Euro formal recognitions on that. I think on the status, I think you're right. I mean, we need to try to help Belarusians, in exile. And so what we try to say as well for short-term, long-term solutions. In Poland, for example, they were changing some of the laws to help Belarusians. In Lithuania as well, for example, the documents issue, which Lithuania has a solution. When we come in here to Austria and met with Foreign Minister Schallenberg, and there are Belarusian community here, and they're also, facing the problem. We're saying like, why don't you try to find a way of supporting the same as Lithuania did? And essentially, we did a breakthrough, and these foreigner passports already are introduced as well for Belarusians here. But in general, yes, we agree that Ukrainians, of course, they're fleeing the war, but people in Belarus, they're also fleeing a huge terror, huge repression. And essentially, we don't want to be in this contest of who suffers most. It's their pain of Ukraine, it's our pain in Belarus, and of course we try to find the way how to support people. You want to get the military?
I can. I mean, I think that yes, the concern is there about the ongoing crawling occupation. I think that Lukashenko is trying to stretches in the time as much as possible because he cares not about sovereignty or independence, but about his personal power. And at the same time, as I've said, I do have certain doubts that Kremlin wants to actually occupy, or they also knew that there might be all sorts of scenarios with people deserting the army or going to the other side. So, I mean, I would be cautious about being very, very alarmistic, saying that the occupation is the immediate goal of Moscow. At the same time, if we talk about what do we do ourselves, if we see the crawling, what are our actions? I can give you an example. When I was at the very beginning attending some of the meetings, with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, meeting various ministers and prime ministers. And I've seen this, when the ministers and prime ministers were asking her, what's your plan? And I was kind of shocked. Guys, it should be a mirror question to you. What's your plan? Because it's not Svetlana Tikhanovskaya who is voting at the UN OSCE. It's you guys. So in a way, it's we don't have the luxury to be observers and wait or be frozen, paralyzed. I think this isn't the time to act now. We see that there's some movement. I wish that we were faster. I mean, you asked also about the like Austrian businesses. I mean, Stadler, like the railway, the banking sector, the telecommunication. I mean, all of that is there. I mean, it's also a question of what do you do on the bilateral level. On with the Austrian businesses, EBRD was very much involved. It's still a big issue there. You know, you asked about the arbitrary about the fertilizers. So now Belarus is suing Lithuania for like 20 billion regarding the like fertilizers. I know for me, I'm not a lawyer, but it's pretty clear that if Norway and other countries like which were buying the like fertilizers would say we wouldn't have bought this either way because it's under sanctions, you know, the entire arbitration like goes like away, and that would be a huge support to Lithuania. Secondly, I mean, it's kind of ironic or even absurd that Lukashenko is appealing to some international like norms. And I was like, well, you know, let Austria invite the guy to Vienna saying like, okay, let's deal with the arbitration and arrest the guy because there's an ICC thing. You know, it's just, we cannot be selective about international norms, you know. So, you know, we can be all sorts of like use the creativity here. At the same time, there's another concern, which like you haven't mentioned, but I will go further on a little bit. What about the free and fair elections? You know, there were concerns, but that Belarusian people, given all this brainwashing, might vote for the like Russian party, and some Kremlin guy in my, first of all, Lukashenko is a Kremlin guy. Secondly, let me remind you of an example of Moldova. I remember when they were like the first direct elections, Moldovans elected Dodon. And I have seen all the international foundations saying like, gosh, like they like chose the Kremlin guy. And you know, I was not panicking. I think that the first like thing which was like so important was that Moldovan people had the feeling that they are able to choose and to control, and that's why the second time they chose Maya Sandu. So you know, there might be all sorts of scenarios, but I think that we don't have the luxury to be paralyzed and to wait what Lukashenko would do. We were waiting for 30 years and we have this result, this crawling occupation. So the nonviolent resistance, again, 70 days of nonviolent resistance in Georgia. And again, we are in this observing like mode. What do we do? There's a like clear call for the like joint. And yes, the regimes are learning from each other. They understand how to fight. It's another question. What do the Europeans do when you have a peaceful protest? Because in 2021 and 2022, again, I've seen some of the European leaders who are asking, you know, can you mobilize the people so that they go against the Ukrainian war? And you know, there's like, well, I think that they are capable of mobilizing the people. But if there are, again, 200,000 people in the streets of Minsk, what are we doing? What is going to be our response?
And actually they went.
Yeah. So the question, like the regimes are learning how to respond to nonviolent resistance, and we need to learn. And I think that the easiest answer is please adhere to international norms. Because this like brutal repressions, terror attacks against the population is against the international norms. So like I know it's not easy, but somehow the international institutions became very process oriented. Let's think, let's wait, let's be concerned. You know, we need some sort of like muscle and action here. On the migration issue, I mean, Lithuania has 70,000 people, like Belarusians. 10,000 of them are related to protests, and there's humanitarian residence permit issued for 3 years. If passport is expired, you can receive the passport of the alien. So in a way, it's a role model for other countries how to adapt to this kind of like situation. Obviously, there's also Lithuania is very like has a hybrid approach, being very tough on the regime, you know, ICC sanctions and all of that, like not issuing visas to folks who are related to the Ministry of Interior or like a former Siloviki, you know, so because security issue is not only about national security of Lithuania, but it's also the security of the Belarusian Democrats as well. So, you know, I think that there's thing to learn from Poland as well. And well, there is no iron wall at the moment, and I think that's like it's very important to make sure that the Democrats are able to be mobile, be it because of the repressions, be it because of like educating us that they like this call for free and independent Belarus is still there.
I'll just add very, very shortly about this occupation and the military, because it's not only the pre-occupation and loss of sovereignty, but it cannot happen not only because of military, but also through the soft powers that Russia is using. For example, in education. For the first time since our independence, we have more students that went to study to Russia than to Europe, because Russia started to invest in this more. They started to get more scholarships and stipends, etc., etc. Meanwhile, of course, it's a bit more complicated to go to Europe, find the scholarships, etc. So that's why we also say we need to win the minds of people, and we need to find even in the small small opportunities and small ways how to live. Like the way we did, for example, here in Innsbruck at the MSc, the private university that decided just to launch a scholarship of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya to give it to the 10 Belarusians, and actually one of the and Belarusians are now studying there, learning, and then they will be the ones who will get back and will, restore the country. And 2020, in many ways, the uprising and, the revolution manifestation and the huge voting for a democratic leader happened because Belarusians were able to serve. They were able to go to Vilnius. They were able to go to trainings of Vitas, Freedom House, and other young Belarusians. There were so many, activities for the civil society on the one hand, but also for people in general. Just to go through, we were, for the several years in a row, we were #1 country in the world by the amount of Schengen visas per capita. Almost every 10 Belarusians were having, visa, and they were able to go and see democracy in reality. So go to Vilnius, see how it's working. Go to, I don't know, Poland, go to Austria even, and other countries, and see how the way it works. And yeah, I think this is on the.
I like how you mentioned the authoritarian.
Also, very important. Sorry, you just mentioned ICC, and I see there are some members of the Deep Corp here. Just to explain, Lithuania made a brave step on, and this is one of our keystones of our foreign policy: is accountability. This is something that Lukashenko and his cronies fear. No one wants to be on the bench and hack, and everyone is fearing this, accountability. And Lithuania has made a very brave step on sending a referral to the ICC about the forceful deportation of Belarusians to Lithuania. And now, I see the Deep Corp here, we're asking other countries to join this referral. Ideally, there will be political support, but ideally with sending a verbal note and supporting this important initiative. Because this is essentially what actually makes a hit on Lukashenko. So for those of you who are from Deep Corp, please consider this.
I like to mention how authoritarian countries cooperate together, and Applebaum described it really to the point in her last book.
Yes.
She also mentioned Belarus there a couple of times, and there's so many layers of it. So you just mentioned winning the hearts and minds even for scholarship like Russia does, and Applebaum also mentions business. So I know the Chinese are trying to invest now much more in Belarus. Belarusian and Chinese military exercises also took place very close to the borders with Lithuania and Poland. So we see it's not even a regional issue; it's becoming much more of a global issue, and we should keep that in mind.
I can just add on that. I recently met with a former political prisoner who came out of the prison, and his reaction was, China is so much present now. You can see restaurants, you can see cars, that's a sign that sanctions are actually working. But at the same time that China is trying to weigh in and that the Belarusian regime is trying to balance a little bit the Kremlin influence with China, but it's dominant that there are some restaurants that you cannot speak, not Belarusian, not Russian, it's everything, and the menu is in Chinese. So that's this, you can see it in the daily life that this China's presence is increasing, and that goes back to this triangle of the authoritarian countries. So it's much bigger than the regional.
Lukashenko-san is studying in Chinese university. 5% of the Chinese exports to Europe come through Belarus as well. A lot of collaboration in dual technology and biotech. This car production, as you said, yeah. Essentially, this is also part of this, as we say, ABC approach, anything by China. This is also related to, the way that Belarus is connected to the Chinese.
We have two more very interesting questions online. You can see them on the screen. So the first one is, how do speakers interpret the recent results of a Chatham House poll that say that 68% of respondents agree with the statement that Lukashenko is keeping Belarus from getting involved in the war in Ukraine? Don't these results indicate that Belarusians, even if they don't support Lukashenko, nevertheless see some value in him considering the geopolitical circumstances after 2020? And the second one, how can the West help release political prisoners? Should it talk partially restore dialogue with the regime to achieve that?
I think for the second one, should it? I mean, there was always a call for a talk, and we as democratic force were always saying, we're in for dialogue and we are in for finding, the ways to talk. But this is, in order to talk, there should be, two parts to talk, and the two parts are respecting the rules and actions. We don't see this with Lukashenko. Lukashenko, what he's trying to do is again to pull people. There were some release of political prisoners recently. I know maybe some of you heard, but I want to give some of the statistics. So he said he pardoned up to 200 people. Huge percentage of these people, they were already finishing their terms. They were about to finish the 2 or 3 weeks of sentence, and then they got pardoned. Not many people know, but we already have up to 2,000 ex-political prisoners, those who served the terms and have been released. And there was not much talk of this. So what Lukashenko is trying to do now is again showing that he's kind of human, that he's kind of trying to make a move towards us. But in reality, if we talk about the release of political prisoners, it should always go hand in hand with the stop of repressions. Repressions hasn't stopped for a day. An amount of people that have been in prisons at the same time as some of them were pardoned and released is more. So we see that he's not actually trying to make a move or turn the page. What he wants is to get some kind of a cheap deal. Of course, he's asking for the let's just to see his propaganda, the TV channels. They say we should release we should lift sanctions. We should find ways how to do this, etc. And we will support everyone who is doing this, even opposition to opposition. We will support them, those who are in exile. But they're trying to find this, this way. But at the same time, we see that nothing has been done on this end from their side. At the same time, when we talk about again sanctions, most of them were, and unfortunately, I think there should be more sanctions on the human rights abuses and the human rights, violations for the people in courts, in the parliament, etc. But most of the sanctions are for the three things that I mentioned before. It's military cooperation and basically becoming an accomplice in this war. Second, for Ryanair, and third, for orchestrated migration. But again, dialogue, yes, of course, everyone wants dialogue, everyone wants to find a way. But we see that Lukashenko, what he wants is try to fool the West and get some of the sanction lists without doing anything. Because his brain is essentially like a chair in 3 legs. So one leg is economy, second leg is Putin and Kremlin, and the third leg is repressions. If you get just one of these legs in this chair, the chair will fall. So he understands, and his security force, they said, we cannot stop repression, because if we do start repression, people will feel freedom again, and he will be insecure. He still thinks on this mentality of 2010 that can repeat. So
on the Chatham House, I think that's kind of a little bit misleading thing, like not giving the context. First of all, that's a consequence of the propaganda, because propaganda is kind of trying to show that it's the regime which stops Belarus from entering the war, also portraying the democratic forces and those who fight in Ukraine as those who are kind of very pro-war, which is, defense is something different than an assault. And Belarus, we have said that, is participating in the war. It's a military garage, the Wagner's army, the nuclear, all sorts of intimidation, the allow the Belarusian soil, Belarus soil, to be used against attack on Ukraine. So I mean, multiple examples which are not like reflected in the social and which are not necessarily understood by the general Belarusian population. That's one. Secondly, there's a huge anti-war sentiment in the Belarusian society. That's not achievement of Belarusian regime. That's a historical consequence, and that's of like what Belarusian people think their mood. So, you know, it's not an achievement of Belarusian regime. So that, though I understand what the Chatham House is saying, I think that Rigora Stapena and other Belarusian experts should actually unpack it a little bit more. Because Lukashenko is the problem and the reason why Belarus is in such a dire situation, basically being complicit with the Kremlin against Ukrainian. And in fact, to mention one ICC referral, there's another ICC referral by Freedom House regarding the deported Ukrainian kids and Belarusian regime's participation in it. Second point regarding political prisoners, yes, political prisoners are being released. That's partly of the sanctions, and that is an indicator that sanctions are working. You know, there were a lot of like, and let's not call that dialogue. We do have some channels of communication and the tunnel there. And we see that the Belarusian regime is actually interested to participate in this, like selling the political hostages. I would call them political hostages. That's the trick that worked in 2015 and before. You know, the problem with that is that while releasing one, they are like capturing the others. So, and there has been a lot of speculation after the prisoners exchange, like with Russia, like Belarus actually participated actively there by taking the hostage of the German citizen, you know, again, which is like, that's a terrorist mindset behavior, like sentencing him to death penalty, which was the last chip in this entire negotiation. You know, like, I'm lecturing arts of negotiation. So, you know, do you negotiate with terrorists? Certain occasions you do, you know, that you do bargain with the devil, but you need, as Donald Trump's administration is saying, like peace through strength, you do negotiate them through strength. And in a way, we've seen with the upcoming like new administration that one Belarus, like US citizen, was immediately released. There are like from Belarus, and there's another US citizen, which is Zinkovich. After this like swap of prisoners, I kind of expected that Norway, which was an active participant of this like prisoner swap, Germany, again with Krasik, the Poland, also active because of the one GRU officer, that all of them are going to be active. There's going to be a Belarus follow-up because Norwegians are interested in the release of Bilatsky. Kolesnikova used to have a residence permit in Germany. Pachobut, like a journalist, like with of the Polish origin. So I think that there's certainly potential. I am certain that some like conversation is happening, but I think that we shouldn't be encouraging this terrorist mindset and behavior like and the overall stand of the Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's office is release them all. And in a way, like the ball is on their side. They need to release them all. Then we might have a conversation, you know, what do we do after that? And in fact, I know that even within the system, there are people, I mean, that's our only way out. And it is their only way out if they want to kind of like start this balancing policy and get out of this crisis that is a result of 30 years of rule of Lukashenko.
I think during this discussion, we have discussed quite in detail why Belarus is important for the security of Europe, especially democratic Belarus. We don't have much time now to discuss democratic Belarus in detail, but if you could tell me in one sentence or 3 bullet points how to achieve democratic transition in Belarus in the current circumstances.
let me start with this, that a lot of people, a lot of politicians are kind of like hesitant whenever saying something positive or standing for nonviolent resistance or for opposition people. You know, they say like, we cannot interfere into the domestic affairs. That's not an interference. Standing for norms and human rights and democratic rights, it's not interference, it's standing for international norms. We are not betting on the people, on any like certain individual. I mean, it's not about like saying Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is the president-elect. I think that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya came to power, and the beauty of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the regime is imposing to us like, what is the alternative to Lukashenko? The beauty of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is saying, you know, we have millions of alternatives. A housewife can be an alternative to the, and her call is free and fair elections. She's not really for power. They want change, like they want people to be the game changer, and that is not a conflict for our like international affairs. We are not interfering into domestic affairs. We are standing for international norms, and by standing, it's not only by shaking hands or saying "Живе Belarus" or having a selfie with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is actually voting at the UN, is actually voting at the OSCE, is actually like pressuring the regime to make sure that they come back to the like rule of law track.
Can agree more. Just the way we structure it is a 5-pillar approach. So 1P, pressure, diplomatic, economic, and political on the regime. So they, you know, to make it obviously weaker. A, assistance at the same time on pressure and assisting the people, civil society, media organizations, those who are actually, you know, is and will be the Belarus, you know, the people of our country through all the, you know, technical assistance, political assistance, etc. So A. Then the third is what we call R, recognition of democratic forces of Slansky, exactly what Vitis said, and non-recognition of Lukashenko. And then A, accountability, something we touched upon, pressuring him through the ICC and ICJ and all the possible means, because we know that also hurts. And the last one is C. This is commitment to democratic Belarus and European Belarus. This is a huge campaign we're working on, exactly as we were discussed before. It's not now the time when you can think, okay, is it, are we here? Are we neutral? Are we with Russia? Are we with that? It's obvious that Russia brings poverty, Russia brings war and disaster. Meanwhile, Europe can bring security and can bring value. So this is commitment for our European future and commitment to our democratic path with both with statements and also with actions. This is something that Belarusian people need now, because they see that there would be you know, a real support from Europe and the West in general.
Thank you very much. So those 5 pillars and your statement that standing for human rights doesn't mean interference. We bring this discussion to a close. Denis Kuvinsky, Vitas Yurkonis, thank you very much for coming to Vienna to share your insights with us. I think we deserve a big round of applause. I'd like to thank our cooperation partners, the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania and the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya for making this event possible here today. Not yet. My thanks also go to our engaged audience. Thank you for your questions, both here and online. And last but not least, I would like to thank my colleagues who also supported me in preparation of this event, especially Kamila Bogdanova and Anthony Bloomberg, but also others who are here today. We'll be watching closely developments in Belarus and also in Lithuania. Please follow our activities, and also we look to cooperation possibilities with this regard. So let's please stay in touch.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.